International Internet Seminary.
International Internet Seminary.com. Old Testament Survey Part 1. The Hebrew Old Testament is the canonical collection of Jewish scriptures called the Tanakh. The Tanakh consists of 24 books which are rearranged into 39 books in the Christian Old Testament. The Old Testament replaces the writings of Hebrew Tanakh in historically chronological order. The order is rearranged, but the contents are the same. The Tanakh is divided into 3 sections. The first division is the Torah, or the 5 books of Moses, or the Pentateuch. The second is the Neviim, or the prophets. And the third division is the Ketuvim, or the writings. The name Tanakh comes from the first Hebrew letter of the 3 divisions. The Christian Old Testament is divided into 4 sections. The first section is the books of the law. The second section is books of history. Third is books of wisdom. And the fourth is divided into major and minor prophets. The Masoretic text of the 9th century AD is the accepted Hebrew Tanakh today, although there are earlier versions of the Hebrew scriptures such as the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Protestant Old Testament uses the Masoretic text, whereas the Catholic Vulgate uses the Septuagint with the Apocrypha. The Old Testament is primarily composed of God's history and relationship with Israel. Christians must study the Old Testament in order to know the historical background of the New Testament and to learn spiritual lessons from the relationship between God and Israel. Now, with an open heart and a willing mind, let's study Old Testament survey. The Book of Genesis. The name Genesis is originally from the Hebrew word Bereshith, which means in the beginning. The English name is from the Greek translation of the Old Testament called the Septuagint. The author of the book is known to be Moses, as the New Testament often refers to Moses as the author of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. The Torah includes Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and is collectively known as the Pentateuch. The book of Genesis is a history book that gives records of primeval history of the world and patriarchal history of Israel. Chapters 1 to 11 are dedicated to primeval history of the world from the creation to the dispersion at the Tower of Babel. Creation Week is outlined from chapters 1 to 2. Early history of mankind is outlined in chapters 2 to 4. The Antediluvian Age before the flood is described in chapters 5 to 6. Noah's flood is told in chapters 6 to 9. The post-flood world and the dispersion of nations is outlined in chapters 10 to 11. And Shem's genealogy to Abraham are recorded in chapter 11. Patriarchal history is recorded from chapters 11 to 50. Abraham is called to become a nation with his descendants in chapters 11 to 25. Ishmael and his descendants are outlined in chapter 25. The history of Jacob and Esau are told in chapters 25 to 36, and the eventful life of Joseph is given in chapters 37 to 50. Creation. The most significant part of Genesis is the creation of the world. According to the Bible, God created the heaven and the earth and everything in it in 6 days. There are many scientific objections to creation. Scientists have devised many theories to do away with God and creation. Steady-state theory asserted that the universe has always existed without creation. This theory was overthrown by the recent Big Bang theory, which proposed that there was a beginning to our universe. But scientific evidences, existence of universal laws, and the impossible odds of evolutionary processes have proven these evolutionary theories to be false. The Bible clearly states that God created the world in the beginning through His power and might in 6 creation days. The creation is accepted in Christian circles with some variations in interpretation. The most literal acceptance of the creation week is young earth creation. The literal interpretation accepts that the Genesis week was an actual week with 24-hour days. The chronological orders of the creation are accepted to be true without scientific objections. Young earth accepts the Bible timeline to be true, adhering to the age of the earth and universe to be around 6,000 years old. Another interpretation of the creation week is called Old Earth Creationism. This interpretation sees the 6 days of Genesis to be long periods of time and not literal 24-hour days. This view accepts evolutionary time of the universe being billions of years old and the earth being millions of years old. This is why this view is called Old Earth. This interpretation accepts the theory of evolution, allowing evolutionary science to be incorporated with Genesis. A mixture between young Earth and old Earth is perhaps the gap theory. This theory accepts that God created the world in Genesis 1:1, but places an unknown period of gap between verses 1:1 and 1:2. God created the world in the beginning in verse 1:1, but destroyed it due to rebellion of Satan, and then recreated the world sometime before 1:2. This view allows evolutionary old ages for the universe and earth and allows for 6-day creation. God theorists assert that there was a creation not described in Genesis before the creation week. Creation week. Day 1. God created the heaven and the earth. The universe and earth were created, and there was darkness with Spirit of God upon the waters. Then God said for light to appear, dividing light from darkness. The light was called day, and darkness was called night. Day 2. God let the vault or firmament appear by separating the waters. The vault was called sky or heaven. Day 3. God gathered the waters under the sky to one place to let the dry ground appear. The dry ground was called land, and the waters were called seas. Vegetation according to their kinds were produced on the earth, with plants and trees bearing fruits. Day 4. Lights were made in the sky to separate the day from night and to serve as signs to mark days and years. The lights lighted the earth, with the sun to light the day and moon to light the night. Day 5. God created living creatures of the sea and winged birds according to their kind. Sea creatures and birds were the first living creatures. Day 6. God created land living creatures according to their kind. Livestock, all creatures that move on ground, and all wild animals were created. This includes all living creatures, insects, vertebrates, and mammals on the earth. God finally created man. Man was created from the dust of the ground and given life to become a living being. They were created to rule all fish, birds, and land animals on the earth. God created male and female in His own image. Adam and Eve were told to be fruitful and increase on the earth. Day 7. God completed the creation and rested on the last day, blessing the 7th day as He rested from all work. sin comes into the world. Genesis 3. The original world that God created in the beginning was perfect and free from sin. Adam and Eve could have fellowship with God and live in happiness and peace forever. But due to Satan's deception, sin came into the world and death resulted from sin. Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Hard work and labor came into their lives, and evil and death prevailed in the world. God promised that Satan will be destroyed by the seed of the woman, who is Jesus Christ, to come in the future. Noah's flood. Genesis 9. The world became full of evil, that by the time of Noah there was no righteous man on the earth except Noah. God destroyed the sinful world with a global flood, destroying everything in it. God had mercy on Noah and his family to save them in the ark. Every kind of animals were saved in the ark as well. Humanity restarted with Noah with his 3 sons and their wives. The 3 sons of Noah repopulated the earth, and each kinds of animals restarted the animal kingdom. Abraham called. Genesis 12. God called Abraham to become his chosen people. Abraham and his descendants through Isaac and Jacob were given the promise of the land of Canaan. Jacob's 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. Joseph brought his brothers into Egypt to escape the famine, where they prospered as a minority. Book of Exodus. The book of Exodus was written by Moses between around 1440 to 1400 BC. The title of the book Exodus means departure. Bondage and Exodus, chapters 1 to 14. The bondage in Egypt and Exodus are described in chapters 1 to 14. Under a new king who did not know Joseph, the Egyptians oppressed the Jews with heavy slavery. Chapters 4 to 14 describe Moses and Exodus. God called out Moses to bring Israelites out of Egypt with mighty miracles and signs. The Pharaoh at first refused to let them leave the land in defiance of God and Moses. God plagued Egypt with supernatural disasters that destroyed Egypt, after which Pharaoh submitted to the God of Israel. The first Passover was instituted with the blood of the lamb. God parted the Red Sea to let the Israelites through, and then destroyed the armies of Egypt in the Red Sea. Wilderness and the Law, 15 to 24. Chapters 15 to 19 outline God's provision for Israel in the wilderness. God provided Israelites with manna and water in the wilderness, but they continued to complain and rebel against God. God brought Israel to Sinai to give them the 10 Commandments in chapters 19 and 20. God's laws were given to Israel to make them his people among other nations. The laws are specified in chapters 21 to 24. Tabernacle, 25 to 40. Finally, in chapters 25 to 40, the Ark of the Covenant is constructed with specific instructions of articles. Special articles like the bronze altar, the basin, table of showbread, altar of incense, golden lampstand, Ark of the Covenant, holy place, and the most holy place are built to worship God. The Passover lamb signified the sacrifice of Jesus Christ as the Lamb of God that died to save the world. The provision of God in the wilderness with manna, quail, and water signified the providence of God to keep his people in the wilderness of this world. We are delivered from the bondage of sin through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, and God will lead the way and provide according to his mercies as we live our lives in the world. But we must be obedient to God's will and continue to live in his grace to find mercies. The laws of Moses were given by God, but no human could perfectly keep all the laws. The laws were given to let humans know that we cannot attain unto God's standards by our righteous works. Jesus Christ came into the world to fulfill the laws. Through his righteousness, he established a new law of faith. We are no longer saved by the works of the law, but by faith in the finished work of Jesus Christ. Book of Leviticus. The book was written by Moses as a part of the 5 books of Moses. Leviticus was written to Israelites to provide instructions and laws of God in order to restore their relationship with God. Sacrifices for sin, special diets, control of diseases, and sacrifices made to God are instructed in the book. Offerings to God, chapters 1 to 7. The laws of burnt offerings, meat offerings, peace offerings, sin offerings, and trespass offerings were instructed in these chapters. God gave specific commandments of offerings for specific sins. They were to continually give offerings to God for forgiveness of sins. Consecrations of priesthood, 8 to 11. Moses consecrated Aaron and his sons as priests to serve God. Sin offerings and burnt offerings were given for Aaron and his people. Nadab and Abihu gave offerings by strange fire and were burnt in the fire by God. Instructions on clean and unclean, 11 to 16. God gave specific instructions on clean and unclean. Clean and unclean animals were distinguished, purifications of women after childbirth were required, instructions about lepers were discerned, and guides for the high priest were given when he is to enter into the holy place. Practical instructions, 17 to 27. Israelites were given specific and practical instructions on how to live their lives and worship God. Various outlines on diets, marriages, sexual morality, and worship are given in the people. Priests were given instructions as well. Their practical lives concerning holiness, marriage, family life, cleansing, diet, and sacrifices were governed by the laws. Various feasts of the Lord were instructed in chapter 23. The Sabbath, Passover, Feast of Pentecost, Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, and Feast of Tabernacles were instituted to worship God. God gave his promise of blessings to them that keep his commandments and cursing to them that break the laws in chapter 26. God loves those that follow God and obey his commandments. The Mosaic laws are said to be shadows of things to come in Hebrews. The daily sacrifices for sin in the Old Testament could never take away sins forever, but the sacrifice of Jesus Christ in the New Testament was the final sacrifice that took away sins forever. We are blessed with the eternal sacrifice of Jesus Christ. He took the place of the sacrificial offering for sin on the cross of Calvary and died on our behalf to pay for the wages of our sin. We are forgiven of all sins through accepting the sacrifice that Jesus Christ paid for us. Book of Numbers. The book was written by Moses as the 4th book of the 5 books of Moses, the Pentateuch. This book is a transitional book between receiving of the law in Exodus and Leviticus and entering into the promised land in Deuteronomy and Joshua. It outlines the wandering in the wilderness and how God dealt with them for 40 years. Numbering the people, chapters 1 to 4. God commanded Moses to number the people of Israel. Instructions on Levites, Kohathites, Merarites, and Gershonites were given with age from which Levites are to begin their service. Regulations 5 to 10. Specific regulations were given to Nazarites and to princes who give offerings at the dedication of the tabernacle. The consecration of Levites, the age and time of their service were outlined with Passover instructions. Journey towards Canaan 10 to 14. Israelites moved from Sinai to Paran. The people started to loathe manna and desired to have meat. God gave them quails, but those that ate them were plagued with wrath. The people encamped in the wilderness of Paran to search out the land. Joshua and Caleb returned from searching the promised land and gave good reports of faith that God would deliver on his promises. But the people complained against the Lord with the searchers who did not trust in God's deliverance. The murmurers were barred from entering into the land, and the man who doubted God died by a plague. More wandering 15 to 19. Due to their unfaithfulness, Israel was left to wander in the wilderness some more. Some rebelled against God with Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, but the earth opened up to swallow Korah, and a fire consumed the other rebels. 14,000 and 1,700 people that murmured against Moses and Aaron died by a plague. The plague was stopped by Aaron and his incense. Journey into Canaan 20 to 36. God began to bring Israel toward the promised land of Canaan. They destroyed the Canaanites first at Hormah. There were some complainers who were plagued with fiery serpents, but they were healed by looking at the brazen serpent. Israel conquered Sihon the king of Ammonites and Og the king of Bashan. From chapters 22 to 24, the account of Balak and his talking ass and Balaam's parables are described. Moses was told of his death, and Joshua was appointed as his successor. More priestly instructions were given. Before they entered into Canaan, the tribes of Gad, Reuben, and half-tribe of Manasseh decided to settle in Transjordan. Their disobedience caused them to be captured by the Assyrians later on. Israel was given instructions for occupying Canaan. The division of land was instructed, and inheritance laws were settled between tribes. Israel's 40 years of wandering in the wilderness can be a picture of Christians in their walk with the Lord. We are wanderers in the world guided by God, but we complain often of worldly desires and doubts of God's will. God chastises us when we are unfaithful and our relationship with God may be rocky at times, but God is always faithful to deliver on his promises. Even though Israel complained often and rebelled against God in the wilderness, God eventually delivered them into the promised land of Canaan. Deuteronomy. The name means second law, as the Mosaic laws are given in more detail. Moses wrote the book as the last book of the Pentateuch. The book outlines the transition of Israel from the wilderness into the land of Canaan. The old generation is passed away, and the new generation is to enter into the promised land with Joshua. There are two divisions in the book. The first part is about looking to the past, and the second part is about looking to the future of Israel. Looking at the past from HOREB to Jordan, chapters 1 to 4. The old generation did not receive the promise, but the new generation with Joshua and Caleb received the promised land. The majority doubted God's deliverance, but courageous few believed in God and conquered the Canaanites. Regiving of the law, 5 to 11. The commandments of God were given for the second time. God's consecrations, the law of manna, and the order for Israel to commit to God's laws were reiterated. Moses encouraged Israel to observe the laws and be obedient to God. Laws given for the future, 12 to 26. Various laws were given for the future of Israel. Laws about judicial and governmental matters, justice, sanctuary, and practical laws about marriage, labor, congregation, and individuals were given in detail. Sanctions and succession, 27 to 34. God told Israel about his blessings and cursings. God commanded Israel to obey the laws for blessings in the land as he promised to restore Israel in the promised land. Moses charged Joshua to lead Israel into the blessings of God and then bless the children of Israel for the last time. Moses passed away in chapter 34 at the age of 120. He spent 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in Midian, and 40 years as the leader of Israel. His passing away left Joshua as the leader of Israel. In Genesis, we saw the calling out of Abraham to make him a nation of people. God promised Abraham of the land of Canaan. Israel was established with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob with the 12 tribes of Israel. In Exodus, we saw the bondage of Egypt and God's deliverance of Israel from slavery. In Leviticus, we saw the holiness of God and his relationship with Israel as freed people. In Numbers, we saw the rebellion of Israel and their wandering in the wilderness. Finally, in Deuteronomy, God's love and faithfulness is given to the new generation as they are led into the promised land with Joshua. In our daily lives with God, we often go through tough times that cause us to be bitter toward God. But even when we are disobedient and rebellious, God is still faithful and loving to deliver on his promises. Israelites had tough times in Egypt and wilderness, and they had times of rebellion and disobedience. But God was faithful to keep his promises and eventually blessed Israel with the land of Canaan. The love of God is expressed in his deliverance of Israel, and we are reminded that we are in the promise of eternal life in Jesus Christ. The Pentateuch ends with Deuteronomy. Genesis to Deuteronomy is the first division of the Hebrew Old Testament, and they are collectively called the Torah. The second division is called Neviim, beginning with the book of Joshua. International Internet Seminary is the best internet seminary that gives university-level seminary education for free. Seminary materials are explained in simple and understandable manner. We provide videos of all our programs to help you easily learn the Bible. Bible study has never been so fun, easy, and free. International Internet Seminary.com